Charles Vogl supports leaders in technology, finance, and government grow more effective in creating change. Using principles drawn from 3,000 years of spiritual traditions, he teaches how to build critical connections for leadership that impacts generations. In his 20s, Charles served in the U.S. Peace Corps in northern Zambia. There, he witnessed inspirational communities inside his rural village. After the Peace Corps, Charles founded Broken English Productions in New York City. His PBS projects touch on topics such as education, school reform, and civil rights advocacy. His film, New Year Baby, tells the story of Cambodian genocide survivors. The film won many awards, including the Amnesty International prestigious Movies That Matter Award. Charles is a regular guest lecturer at Yale, where he earned his Master's of Divinity. His first book, The Art of Community, shares how both community and belonging can be built through time-tested ideas and rituals. The book is a guide to creating meaningful communities that enrich both individuals and humanity. It won a Nautilus Book Award for business and leadership writing. Please join me in welcoming applause for our guest, Charles Vogl.
Fantastic. Good morning. We can have the slides now if you're wondering. Let me share that it is always exciting for me to be invited into a room, in this case where there are hundreds of people. Oh, I see the problem here. We'll handle this in a minute. It's always exciting for me to be in a room where hundreds of people have come, hopefully with honest communication while you're here, because we want to get better or learn something new about connecting. In a few minutes, I'm going to talk about how we're living in an age which may be unprecedented in the level of disconnection that's going on and loneliness. And my guess is all of you are living in this age, and so you may be already familiar with that. So the fact that you are sitting in a room with hundreds of people who want to do something and have voted with your feet to learn something about that is pretty exciting. I want to be crystal clear that the reason that I'm on stage right now, the reason I was invited to come in from Oakland to talk to all of you, is because I'm an expert in belonging. And we know this is true because I wrote a book. That's true. And in America, this is the standard of expert, and I did it. I have the microphone. Before we continue any further, what I'd like you to know is that the reason that I could write a book and be an expert on belonging is I felt lonely for a very long time. And when I say I felt lonely, I mean like cry alone at night, sometimes kind of lonely. Like wonder if I would ever make the kind of friends that I wanted to make, kind of lonely. The kind where I wondered if I'd ever find the place where I would know and I would feel that I belonged. I'm speaking to a room of hundreds of people. Only you know if there's anybody in this room who has shared those thoughts and maybe the feelings that come with them. I could talk a lot about the times I felt lonely, but they only gave me an hour, so I'm only going to talk about one. I'll share with you that in my early 30s, I went to graduate school at Yale to study religion, philosophy, and ethics. And when I got there, what I discovered is it turns out, at least for me, and I would later find out for many other people, that the history and the brand of Yale looms so large that many of us believe that we could never be good enough to actually belong there. And what this meant was that many of us just walked around convinced that, well, obviously we shouldn't have been invited. And this is true. I actually walked through the halls of my own graduate school worried that at any moment a dean was going to come up behind me, tap me on the shoulder, and explain that there had been a terrible mistake. That, in fact, I shouldn't be there and I'd have to leave right away. And I already knew that what I would say when this inevitable thing was going to happen was, I know. I've been wondering what took you so long. So in that first semester in graduate school, I reflected on some of the wisdom of some sages that I respect and some mentors who have supported me. And my wife and I started a dinner series in our home on Friday nights. And all I mean by that is we would make a ton of food on a Friday night, and then we would invite anybody who wanted to share a meal with us on Friday night to do that. And I promise you, in that first semester, there was a lot of evidence that this was a terrible idea. There were the many occasions where I would make a lot of food, and then like 3 people would show up on a campus of 15,000 people. There were the occasions when people told me that they would show up for dinner that I was making in my home, and then between that conversation and Friday night, they found something way more interesting than dinner with me. And then there were the many times where I had to say no to anything fun that happened anywhere on campus or anything in New York because I was going to create a dinner that I didn't know if and who would show up. But we kept on doing it, and over 2 years, something extraordinary happened. And that is, those dinners actually became popular. In fact, they became so popular that after 2 years, we had hosted over 500 people in our home, one small dinner party at a time. And the interest had grown so large that my wife and I were just exhausted and we needed help continuing this. And so at that point, we turned to our regulars at these dinners, who now had become our friends, and we asked them if they would help to continue. And so out of that meeting with our friends, we created dinner teams that would be responsible for any given Friday night dinner. And then we had dinner leaders that would make sure that they would run that team. And then Arjan and Sam went on to coordinate those teams and the wait lists that we were generating, and coordinate the sponsors who would underwrite the groceries that the undergrads couldn't always afford to make a gifted meal to strangers on a Friday night. Over those dinners, cleaning my kitchen, I made some of the dearest friends in my life. Some of them would hike the Inca Trail with me. Some of them would stand with me at my wedding in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Before we move on with the rest of today's presentation, I want to talk about one of those friends. This is a picture of Milo, and I'm sharing his picture with you because at my 5th year at Yale, Milo specifically asked that the two of us share lunch together. And so I remember we went to what we call the Yale Commons, which is a building a block long that looks a lot like this. And we sat underneath that vaulted ceiling on one of the northern tables, and it was at that table that Milo shared something with me that I had not known. And he shared that his first year at Yale had been the hardest year of his life. He'd come from the Philippines, and when he had arrived in Connecticut, the workload, the culture shock, and the New England weather were enough challenge for him. But after he'd arrived, he had discovered that his medical doctor wife, Jazz, could not legally work in Connecticut, and so she had to move hundreds of miles away so that they could make ends meet. And so that meant he was living alone. And then that October, weeks after he'd arrived, he discovered that his mother's fight with cancer had worsened. His family couldn't afford a surprise round-trip ticket from Connecticut to Manila, and so he couldn't return home to one last time say, "I love you," or say goodbye. He didn't have a lot of friends at school yet, and so he shared with me that he stayed home at night and cried by himself. He told me that when he got back to Manila that summer, he knew he would never return to Yale. Didn't matter that he had a full scholarship to the #1 program in his field. Didn't matter that he was one of very few Filipinos in the world to study at the university. He told me that he just knew that he wasn't strong enough. And that's when he told me, "Then I remembered your dinners. Then I remembered all the invitations to your house. And that's when I knew I wasn't alone. And that's when I knew that I was strong enough." I didn't know that the reason that Milo had asked me to lunch that day was that he would be walking in graduation in the next 2 weeks. And he wanted to make sure that before he left campus that I knew that I and all of us who had created dinners for many times strangers had changed the course of his life. I'm sharing this story because when I talk about building community, building connections, and I'm often talking to people who work at large organizations and they envision creating something that even goes global. I like to start with a story that reminds us that while it's great to build a community that might span the world, and I do work with organizations that do, building community looks a lot like sitting down at a table. It looks a lot like cleaning my kitchen. And it is those commitments that we do over and over that creates the relationships that actually change the course of our lives. So thanks for listening. So in our time today, I'm going to do a few things. Obviously, I'm talking to smart people who have literally years of experience, and we're only going to spend this hour together. So I'm going to give you an overview of what my work looks like so that it'll give you a sense of principles that I talk about, that if you find it compelling and want to apply it to what you do, you'll be able to do that. I'm going to go, it's an overview, so I'm going to go quickly. So if you get mad at me because I don't go deep on that, there's a reason, and it's all written down, and you can have access to it if you get the book, and it's written for smart people to read quickly. Then we're going to, I'm also going to talk briefly about the context that we're all living in, which makes this conversation important and probably informed you to show up in a windowless hotel ballroom to listen to me for a keynote. And then we're going to drill down a little bit on one of these ideas so that you can learn how and if you want to apply it in what you do. And then at the very end, if you want to go deeper and you think this is all applicable, I'll let you know how you can do that. For some of you, this may be enough, and that's great. And if I'm successful in our time together, I want to make sure that you leave the room that you can see something you didn't see before, so that if you want to make choices that can pull levers, that can encourage people that you know to connect better, that you'll be able to do that. You'll have ways to play with choices to connect the people you already care about better. And if I'm successful in that, my hope is at least some of you in this room will feel both inspired to start playing and connecting people you already care about, and also feel more confident that in fact you can. And we'll see if we can do that in our time together. So, try to think. First things first, I like to play a game. We're spending this hour talking about connecting, and so since we live in a very particular age, I'm going to invite you to join me in just our time together to do this. To take this device and put this device in here like this. just so that this is going to be an interactive time, and you're going to talk to other people, and we're going to vote with our hands that we're going to be with people in the room and not the people not in the room. And then we can put that basket underneath the table. And if some of you start sweating and shaking, then I'm going to give you permission to hold the hand of someone next to you, and you know where those devices are. I know this is the first time for many of you. This is the opportunity for growth. Okay. All right, I need help from one person who has an ancient device that dates before 2001 that can help us with timing so that I can be distracted. Jen, you want to do that? So Jen's going to be our timer. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about why we are in this room together. Research indicates that this may be the loneliest time in American history. I'm going to qualify that. The social research I'm looking at does not go back to 1775. It's possible in the 1820s it was more lonely. We just don't have research on that. But just work with me. And the stuff that I have access to, it looks like more Americans are lonely now than ever before. And that didn't happen in a vacuum. The trends that got us here are actually expanding. And I'll just be straight with you. I'm actually pessimistic about where we're going with this. However, I am optimistic that when we learn how we can connect people better than apparently is going on in the world, and then we have tools to do that, we can be really effective in allowing the people that are around us and connected to us escape what the rest of the country is experiencing. I know that people like stats, so I'm going to give you stats so that you know this is official. So here's an official thing. We're the most lonely generation. You may have already feared that. This is a title of a front page article on a very huggy publication called the Harvard Business Review. Vivek Murthy is the former Surgeon General, and he calls loneliness in America a legit epidemic. And for those of you who don't know, loneliness is more dangerous to your health than smoking. I'm not going to go into the rabbit hole of what that means. But I just want you to understand that when the former Surgeon General is writing the Harvard Business Review that this is an epidemic, it's not funny anymore. It's not relegated to the world of social workers. This is important to anybody who's leading a team and you want to get something done in the work world. We've blown past that line. Personal networks have decreased approximately a third. That's fully 1/3. And yes, this does account for numbers on social media. To give you a sense of how that works, on Facebook, I believe I have over 1,500 friends. I don't know if that means I'm winning in this room. I will share with you that when my wife and I moved from Connecticut to Oakland, California, less than 596 people showed up to help us move. Which led me to understand that that number may not have actually reflected how many friends I have who will help me when I want it. Another statistic, Americans report that they have fewer confidence than a generation before. In fact, my wife says that the average is 4, which is to say Americans, half of Americans may have 4 or less, which is not a lot when you're in a world where people get sick and car accidents happen and jobs change. And a lot of people report that they have no friends. And along with that, the number of people who say they have no one to talk to about important things has increased 3 times. So when you're looking around the room, I don't know how much this applies to this room or not, but we do not have to go very far to find people. I'm a professional, people. Oh, here we go. I found the problem. Yeah. Thank you for alerting me. We do not have to go very far to find people who, whether we know it or not, really would like to be more connected than they are. And of course, I know that I'm talking to a room of professionals who lead teams and coach people who lead teams. When your team shows up and they don't have someone to ask for help, and they don't have that help when they have challenges, and they don't feel connected, this makes a big difference. I have this slide because it talks about money, and some people need to know, yeah, but why is it important for us? Well, here it is. We know that roughly 50% of people report that they're burned out at work. Of course, when you're burned out, that really decreases engagement for obvious reasons. And we know that the number one factor that impacts engagement is, do you have a friend at work? People don't stay at places where they're burned out, they're not engaged, they don't have a friend. Real talent, everybody in this room knows, is very, very expensive. I'm from the Bay Area. It's really expensive. If you have a place people don't want to be and they're not connected, this becomes a multi-million-dollar problem very, very quickly. Hopefully you already knew that, but here's the slide if you didn't. So now we're going to do an activity together. We have our timekeeper with Jen, so that's handed. So I'm going to ask everyone in this room to break up into groups of 3. And I realized when I talk to people who are smart and educated and have authority, I have to say this next part. 4 is not 3. So when we're done here, if you're in a group of 4, then you've done it wrong. Okay. So there's maybe goofy numbers at the table, so you can go find somebody else. And you're going to stay in those groups for our time together. So we're going to give you a full 30 seconds to find 2 other people. And if we have to have 2, then that can work. So I'll see you in 30 seconds, and Jen will tell us when that's up. All right, I'd like to start at the beginning because the beginning is a good place to start. And I also like to make sure that if we're going to talk about this, that it's relevant. So I'm going to ask that with the 2 people you're sitting with, that each of you share a time where you felt lonely. And you're going to get bonus points if it's a time where other people didn't know you were lonely. And you get even more bonus points if it's recent. So time where you're lonely, bonus points if it's time no one knew you were lonely, more bonus points if it was time that was recent. We're about 3 minutes on the clock, and Jen's going to tell us when 3 minutes is up. All right, okay, I'll see you in 3 minutes. All right, Jen says that's our 3 minutes, so if we can have you come back to the center of the room. I promise you can talk to one another after this session. Great, fantastic. So just to make sure that this topic is in fact relevant to this room, I'm going to ask 3 of you to be brave and share something that you're willing to share about a time that you felt lonely with your bonus points opportunity still intact. So who's willing to share a time where you felt lonely, maybe that others didn't know you were lonely? Yeah. Your name? Kristen, do we have a microphone that Kristen can use? I see it here. Okay. Wait, Kristen's up here. Thanks, Kristen. Thanks for being brave, Kristen. I know you don't know me and you don't know half people in this room, so thanks for participating.
So I was a transformation consultant traveling from Denver to New York City every week, and I was working with a client there by myself on the account. I had recently been promoted to this role, and they weren't listening to anything I had to say. Nothing I did was working. I would give all of the stuff we teach on a golden platter. I thought I was doing everything right, and they just would push back on everything. I found myself always getting the window seat, flying back to Denver because I would cry into the window, just saying, why the hell am I doing this anymore? I'm going to be a real estate agent because I am so screwing this up. And I never told my boss because I was afraid he would fire me and say, what the hell are you doing? You should know how to do this. And we went to a coaches conference that we hold every year, and I still had not told anyone. And one of my friends said, Kristen, you should tell your story about that account because you're doing such an amazing job. And I just bawled. I was like, how do you even know? I feel like I suck so bad that I need to be a real estate agent because there's no way I should do this anymore. So I think just having that family at work that I could finally tell people that I felt like a failure was so great, because ever since then, I know the tears are telling you that I still feel it, but that's just because it's remembering that time. But I'm so much better now because that family at work they held me up. And so now that's what I'm doing for other people, is I'm coaching other coaches to talk about love and belonging through leadership. So it was amazing.
Right. Kristen, can you keep the microphone? Kristen, keep the microphone. Kristen, will you keep the microphone, please? Can we talk a little more?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Are you willing to stand up because I want them all to see you? And I was going to say this from over there, but the words that came to my mind while you were sharing is, I like bravery when I see it. And you can see the heads nodding. Yeah. And I actually still have goosebumps because of what you shared, and how you opened up this whole conference. It's a couple days with real honesty and vulnerability and bravery. So thank you for that. Yeah. I see it as a profound gift. I see this as a profound gift to several hundred people who have come here to learn something, and I'm guessing some of them want to connect.
Yeah.
Can I ask a few questions about that time of your life that sounded like it spanned at least a few weeks or months that were really painful for you?
Yes.
So I just want to be clear, did you have access to a phone when you felt lonely during this time?
Yeah.
Did you know other people who had a phone?
Yeah.
When you were meeting with teams, did people talk to you in those meetings?
Yeah.
Did you have colleagues who knew you were out there and were some type of support in the work you were doing?
Intellectually, I knew it. Emotionally, I thought I was alone.
But they existed,
Yeah.
is my point.
Yeah.
And it sounds like then when you returned home, you had people to talk to.
No.
I thought someone, I wasn't there. Someone said that you're doing a fantastic job.
Oh, it was a few months later at a
Okay.
coach's internal conference, yeah.
Okay, so there were people in your life who roughly knew what you were doing and said
Yeah.
nice things to you. Okay, and you still felt lonely.
Yeah.
Great. I think you're not the only one.
Nope.
In fact, I'm guessing there's a few people in this room where all those factors apply.
Yeah.
And what I love about your share and what I love about this description is it sounds like to anybody looking at you, and in this case, there were people looking at you, they would never guess what was really going on.
Oh, no. I'm really good at covering it up.
Yeah. And again, you're probably not the only one.
Yes.
Which is to say that there wasn't a lot of evidence that you would have really appreciated someone to connect with you
Oh, yeah.
at a level other than judgment,
Yeah.
right, in that time of your life.
Right.
So thanks for sharing that and getting clear. That was so great. All right. Let's have if one more person could share, and then we'll move on, because I want to make sure we get to everything. I saw a hand over here. Okay, great. Your name? Sarah. Sarah, great. Thanks for volunteering and being brave, Sarah.
Okay, so I've been at my current company it's a little over 4 years. And I came from my old company being there for 20 years. So it was a very big change for me to make the move. And I felt very lonely at that time at my new job. But it was because there was a lot of change going on with the company at that time. And because I was the new person taking somebody else's job, there was a lot of resentment and hurt, that came directly at me. And even though, I wasn't a bad person, it was just I was the one that felt the brunt of it. And a lot of other people that came on at the same time did too. So, going to a new place after 20 years is really hard, making new friends, taking that leap of faith that you're going to be able to do a new job after 20 years of doing your old job. I felt really lonely at that point. But a couple people at this table, I want to just take a shout out to Adriana. You were my boss at that time, and you saw through what I was going through. You you definitely helped me through that rough time, and I wouldn't be here without your help. So I just want to say that you did show a little light for me when I was going through that lonely time. And a few months later, Victoria came, and one of my dear friends, Jen at work, came, and I wouldn't really have survived without any of you. So I just want to say thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Great, thanks for sharing. Well, we're not done yet. We're not done yet. Thank you for being so brave beginning this conference and sharing time professionally. May I ask a few questions about that?
Sure.
So when you took this new job, did you know what the job was?
Oh, yeah.
And when you showed up at work, like they knew what your credentials were and they knew that you were hired. They were like, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
And did people talk to you when you got there?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
you knew how to do the job?
Somewhat. I mean, yes.
Okay. And you were still lonely, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah, I think you're not the only one who's experienced that. And you just acknowledged two colleagues that made a big difference. So it sounds like in the midst of that, whether other people knew you were lonely or not, colleagues reaching out to you and just giving you words of support, it sounds like it changed your life.
Yeah. I wouldn't have. There were days where I was ready to walk out and not come back.
So you're telling me you took a job you were qualified for, a job where they thought that you should work there, and colleagues reaching out and just offering words of support, am I saying this correctly, changed the course of your life?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for being brave. And my guess is, go ahead, we can applaud, you can applaud. What I like making explicit in this room is that if and how much we take this seriously changes the course of people's lives. And since sometimes the bottom line matters, it matters to an organization, changes the course of history of an organization. And that's why we want to pay attention to this, if at all, because it'll be important. We did this. So in the time, let me explain what I mean by community. In my work, I exclusively work with people in a leadership role. And all I mean by that is I'm working with people who themselves are working to connect people in bigger and better ways. And what I mean by community is a group of people who share mutual concern for one another. Several hundred people sitting in a ballroom is not a community. It's something, it's a group, it might be a list of professionals, it might be a room full of attendees, it's not a community. It could be, and it could get there from here, but it's not. It's when we generate that mutual concern, which shows up, as we've heard today, when someone expresses concern. How can I help? Are you doing well? That's when we start having community. So when we're talking about a leadership role in community, and we're talking formal and informal in my work, what we're talking about is how we help grow this mutual concern. Because getting people in a room or in an office or a place where they're giving away free pizza is not the challenge. It's how do we generate that mutual concern. When I was invited to come speak here today, somebody who's on leadership in this conference said that they think there's a lot more potential for the attendees here to connect than they have in the recent past. I wasn't here, I'm not judging you, I was just told that. And I don't know if that's true, so here's what I do know. I'm in the room with hundreds of people who woke up, presumably bathed, found this room, and even though it has no windows, sat at a table to learn something. I'm curious how many of you hope to leave this hotel within the next 2 days, and it would be great if you knew 2 more people who you think actually care whether you have success in becoming who you want to be. And you would love it if they call you when they think you can help in becoming who they want to be. Okay, I don't know how much that's going on, but you've all seen now that you're in a room with dozens, I think well over 100 people in this room who have already voted with their feet, and they think that would be a great outcome over the next 2 days. And I hope just those volunteered hands give you a little bit more permission to reach out in ways that could be more fun than just talking about technical needs. For the purposes of my work, I've broken down, or rather distilled, some wisdom into what I call 7 principles, just to help us understand what's going on and see what's going on around us, that we can play with these ideas when we think it's appropriate. The first principle is what I call the boundary principle. This idea, if you're going to create a tight connection in a community, it's really important that you know who's inside and who's outside. It's very difficult to create tight bonds if you don't know who's in the community. And so there's this idea that we need to know who's inside and outside, and the way that happens is they cross a boundary. There's a lot more to this idea, and in my workshop later this afternoon I'll go into that. Right now, know that the boundary principle is important. Number 2, the initiation principle. People want to know, when do they actually belong here? And my guess is most of us in this room have visited some group somewhere where we wanted it to be really clear we definitely weren't a member. And we know this, others know this, when there's a clear initiation, and either you have gone through it or you haven't gone through it. And if we don't provide initiation in a leadership role, and it can be small or grand, then people wonder if they're still a member. And then they may even stay away in hopes that we don't confuse them as a visitor. Number 3, the stories principle. You know what stories are because you're adults. In this context, the stories are what are shared that reveal the actual values of a community. I'll give you a hint. Nobody cares what it says on your website. Never read a website of an organization that didn't value integrity. I've met a lot of organizations that don't value integrity. The stories that we choose to share and then who we share them with lets people know who we are and how much we trust them that they're connected. Another way to say the same thing is if people don't know your stories, they don't know who you are. Again, there's a lot more to it. That's the principle. Next principle is the symbols principle. Symbols are items that represent a suite of ideas, and in this case, relationships. One kind of symbol is a token, a symbol that we give to people and they take with them to remind them of our shared values and their connection to us. And my guess is every person in this room has a symbol in your bedroom that's reminding you of a relationship that's important to you. The next principle is the ritual principle. The rituals in this case are things that we do that have meaning. They may have started as an action that was practical, but they have now taken on a meaning that help us know that we're connected. And one of the things we want in community is we want others to understand and know and ideally acknowledge how we're changing. And rituals are a way to reveal that in community. The second to last principle is the temple principle. All I mean by this is a place where we go where we know we're going to find the people in our community, and as a practical matter, we'll enact the rituals that are important to us there. For most of us in this room, Thanksgiving is an important ritual that brings our families together. And there are a few places in our families that are the temples that we pilgrimage to gather. And when we go there, those places are special. And if we move that Thanksgiving to the local McDonald's because it was inexpensive and empty, it probably wouldn't work as well. In a leadership role, we can notice what temples are in place. And if there aren't temples in place, notice how that can help a community bond. The last principle, by far the most sophisticated, is the inner rings principle, this idea that within a mature community are inner rings of groups in the larger community. In this case, those rings are not there to allow older members to just be really smug to newer members. You probably have visited a group where that's going on, and you probably had an entirely appropriate reaction. These rings are there to reflect the maturity of a member. My guess is in your field, it's important that not every conversation includes someone who's just been introduced to Agile 4 weeks ago, right? When we have appropriate inner rings that reflect maturity, what it does is it allows new members a path toward growth. And in those inner rings are the elders who, in a healthy community that shares mutual concern, will help them in that growth. All right, enough on that. Let's get to something fun. We're going to talk a little bit about an idea that we can play with when we're in a community that we want to bring together. So earlier I talked about my experience in graduate school, wandering around, convinced I didn't belong there. It didn't matter that I got a note that said, please come. And then I signed some paperwork that allowed me to come. And then when I got into classrooms, like people talked to me, I still was convinced I didn't belong there. And I now know that I was by far not the only one. And the term I use to describe this scenario is a crisis of belonging, where I was with a bunch of other people who were all convinced they also didn't belong, and we were all not belonging together. My guess is at least one person's room is like, oh yeah, I recognize that. So I'm going to reveal a tool that you can use that can destroy a crisis of belonging. This tool also works anytime there are people who just wonder how much they're connected, or people want them to be connected with a group that you may already assume they should feel connected. And you can use, this tool is free to use, and you can use it over and over again several times a day. It's so simple that originally I was afraid to introduce it into rooms when I'm speaking as an expert, because I was afraid people would say, are you kidding me? Seriously? That's what you're talking about? But I've learned now, traveling across the country and working with people who are sometimes bringing together well over 100 million people, that this is an important tool to talk about in our efforts to bring people connected. And that tool is invitation. And notice I have a photograph of a bowl of noodles there. I'm not talking about an invitation to a big gala, or the big Christmas party with 1,000 people, or a conference far away for several. I'm talking about like sharing noodles, or a walk in a park, or coffee after a session at a conference. Like, that's what I'm talking about. And it sounds so simple and accessible that it's kind of silly to talk about, right? Because it's just an invitation. And yet, this is a profound missing in so many efforts, at least across the country, where people are trying to bring people together and wondering, why are they not connecting? I want to give you an example. I was working with the student religious leaders at Harvard recently, and one of the Catholic leaders said to me, Charles, we know how many Catholic students at Harvard, because Harvard tells us. We know how many people come to weekly mass, because we can count them. And we know how few people come to our weekly meetings. How can we improve the community here at Harvard? And my answer was, I have no idea. Maybe you guys are just total jerks, and everybody's figured that out, and they don't want to hang out with you on the weekdays. Maybe that's going on. But I do have a question. In a year at Harvard, how many times does a Catholic student get a phone call that says, I'm calling from the Harvard Catholic Student Association, and we would love it if you would come join us during the week, because we're doing our efforts to connect Catholic students so that we can build friendships that will support us in our time here as we form to the leaders we want to be for the rest of our careers and the rest of our lives. Will you join us? And of course, the answer was none. Every Catholic student gets 0 phone calls with that message. And he said, but we do send an email blast out. Yeah, right. And we all know how many email blasts we get, and we're like, oh, I don't know. They weren't inviting anybody, and they weren't getting results, and they were confused why the community wasn't connecting. When we send an invitation, the no's don't matter, and I'm going to explain why. But we're trying to bring people together, and when people decline us for our invitations, it doesn't mean that we've failed. We got to look to who's actually accepting. And the no's don't totally matter. In fact, invitation is so powerful. Even when people say no, remember they don't matter, 2 things are going on that makes a difference in community. The first one is the person we're inviting gets a data point that somebody they know thinks they belong at coffee, at a gala, at a walk around a park. Somebody thinks they belong. And whether they accept it or not because they're taking care of a sick parent, because they've had a cancer diagnosis, because their family's in financial crisis and they just don't know how to get their head above water, we don't know. Even when they say no, every time that invitation comes, they know somebody thinks they belong. What I didn't tell you about Milo is in the first year he was at graduate school, he joined us for dinner 3 times. 3. The invitations, far more than the hours sitting with me over a meal, are what changed his life. He had all those data points that told him he wasn't alone, even though because his life was falling apart, he could only join us 3 times. The second thing that's happened when we send out an invitation is we let people know that they know somebody with the power to bring people together. And whether they're accepting it in that moment or not, they know somebody. They're just not dangling by themselves, hoping that somehow, maybe by accident, if they get lucky, they can get connected. There's somebody who's willing to make that outreach. We talked earlier how we're living in a place of desperate loneliness and disconnection. Oh my goodness, what a difference it would make if the hundreds of us left this room and the least that happened is the people around us knew were people bringing people together, right? Our whole communities would change. Unfortunately, just by invitation, which doesn't get used, right? When we invite people and we bring them in, one of the things that we're demonstrating is we're an elder. Just by the invitation. Like, we haven't even told them we're smart or we like them, but we're demonstrating that we're an elder. And in the examples we got earlier today where someone said, I felt lonely at work even though I had colleagues, one of the things we want is someone who's an elder to us, at least in one area. It can be at work, it can be in philanthropy, it can be in faith. That there's an elder who says, I'm concerned about your welfare, meaning I want to help, and I'm a resource to you. And the reason I bring this up here is everyone in this room is an elder to someone. And if you look back on your life and you think of the conversations that may have changed the course of your life, my guess is some meaningful percentage of those was an invitation from an elder. And if they hadn't made that, the level of connection you would have felt and support would have been radically different. Okay, I've got 15 minutes. I'm going to share one story about how this made a difference in me, and then we're going to go into an exercise in the time that we have. So this is a photograph of my cousin Kevin, who lives in Honolulu, Hawaii, and he's a prominent Hawaiian musician. And when I turned 30 years old, I was waiting tables on Broadway in New York City, telling people that I was making a movie. I was one of those guys. And people would laugh in my face when they said, what do you do? And I said, I'm a filmmaker. And then they would laugh. And I presume because I was actually taking a drink order, so I clearly wasn't actually a filmmaker. And that was me at 30. And I turned 30 years old, and so to celebrate turning 30, wondering if my life was going to turn into anything meaningful whatsoever, I went to visit my cousin Kevin and family in Hawaii, and Kevin was among them. And here I was, no longer in my 20s, wondering if I mattered or I would ever make a difference and if I belonged anywhere except waiting tables. And I remember that Kevin invited me to join him to a musical event with his friends one evening. So that evening, we drove up to, it's called St. Louis Heights above Manoa Valley in Honolulu, Hawaii. And I remember it was at night, and we pulled up to this narrow street, and in an open-air garage, I could hear Hawaiian music coming out of the open windows. And as we entered, I realized what was going on. And these were the prominent on the island, away from the hotels. All right. These were the prominent Hawaiian musicians away. You can swap me out of my. And they had gathered together away from the tourists, so that they could just celebrate their art together. And Kevin was among them. And he had invited me into this inner ring. So to this day, I don't know the names of those musicians. I'm not a musician now. I don't speak Hawaiian. So I didn't continue the relationships thereafter. I didn't become a Hawaiian musician. But because of that invitation, I knew that I belonged somewhere. All right, because of that invitation, I knew I belonged somewhere, and then made a profound difference in who I was becoming, trying to make a difference as a filmmaker in a world where I didn't think anybody appreciated it yet. All right, so I'm going to ask you to return back to your groups of 3. And I want you to reflect on the invitations that you've had and share an invitation that you now understand was important to you. Now, I'm not talking about events that you went to that were fantastic. There can be an event connected. Or relationships you forged at an event because you got invited. I want you to reflect on an invitation that was extended to you, maybe for an elder, and you now reflect the invitation made a real difference to you in feeling connected and know you belong. Okay, we're going to put 3 minutes on the clock, and then we're going to come back in 3 minutes. See you then. Can I get a few extra minutes? Yeah, okay. All right, that's it. Let's come back to the center of the room. They really want me to finish so we can send you off to more exciting things. So please come back to the center of the room. And who will be brave and share an invitation you now recognize was really important in you feeling connected? I see a hand over here. Your name, sir?
My name is Nasir Karamat.
Nasik, is that?
Nasir, N-A-S-I-R.
All right, Nasir?
Okay, so I just want to share an invitation that has changed my life. And it's very recent, by the way. It just happened end of last year that I was approached by the chairman of the board of a brand new charity hospital that's been opened in Guatemala. And the chairman asked me, he says, Nasir, you have a lot of healthcare experience, 20 plus years, I work in healthcare. And he says, would you be kind enough to go and help the hospital who's designed for the poor and the needy people of Guatemala, near Guatemala City? So I thought about it and I said, yes, certainly this is a great opportunity. He invited me to it. So I ended up taking 2 months off.
Nasir, I hate to cut you off. I have to leave the stage in a few minutes. So
Okay.
could you share us what the invitation was?
Yes, the invitation was to come and help the people of Guatemala near Guatemala City with this new hospital,
Okay.
so that they could receive healthcare services.
Got it. So you got an invitation to provide healthcare services to people you don't know in another country that you're not going to work with every day.
Correct.
And do they pay you an enormous amount of money to fly to another country and work with these people?
$0.
So you're telling me you got an invitation to work for free for people you don't know in a place that's not your country, and this invitation made you feel more connected.
Absolutely.
Got it.
It made
And
me
you all
realize
know
that-
why. And the reason is
the-
because somebody invited you to help you be who you want to be.
Precisely, to serve humanity, basically.
Fantastic.
And
Thanks.
to
It's a
make me
great.
realize, one more
No.
please, make me realize that all the blessings that each one of us in this room has, I think we need to repay back to humanity. And this was an invitation for me to repay back to
Fantastic.
humanity.
Thank you, Nasir. All right. So what I love about this example, right, is they didn't say, hey, man, there's going to be fantastic cheesecake there. You're going to love the view. That was not the invitation. Hey, do you want to work for free for people you don't know? And you'll never get rich doing this. We don't need to worry whether our invitations are offering material value or necessarily sound fun. We all want invitations to things that might even be difficult if they help us to be who we want to be. All right, one more example, and I see a hand up here. And your name, ma'am? Brooklyn. Thank you for being brave, Brooklyn.
Yeah, so I was working in a boutique that had a gallery space on the top floor, and we had a drag king troupe. This is probably the only not work-related example that anybody's given, but we had a drag king troupe that rehearsed, and they kept asking me to audition. And I kept being like, no, I don't know that that's my thing, and I don't know if I want to perform, and that seems really scary. And eventually I just did it. I just bought into the invitation, auditioned, nailed it, became a championship-winning drag king in Philadelphia. Thank you. Second best drag king in Philadelphia. Found a community, found people who were weird just like me, learned how to mess up on stage and handle it gracefully, learned how to look like an idiot in front of a large group of people. Hey, that's what's happening right now.
Great. So I want to ask a question about this. So when you got the original invitation, was it really easy to learn how to dress like a performing drag performer?
No.
It wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't even easy.
No, so drag queens, everybody knows what drag queens are, but drag kings are like this weird underground thing, or they were at the time.
Yeah. But they promised fame and
idea.
fortune. They promised fame and fortune?
No.
No?
No.
And you still said yes, this invitation made a difference in your life?
Yeah.
Yeah, got it. Thanks for a fantastic example where the invitation. Now, of course, there's a lot more to building community than this, and we could talk literally for days on this. What I love about this example is everybody in this room knows how to make an invitation, and everybody in this room has people you can invite, and now everybody in this room understands that no totally doesn't matter, and in fact, an invitation where someone says no can in fact change their whole life. I'm trying to think what order we should do these things in. All right, so at the beginning of our time together, I said I was going to present ideas that I hoped would help at least some of you in this room see what's going on around you in our time with the people you care about in a way that gives you more clarity about how connection happens and maybe how loneliness is happening. And I said that I was able to do that. I'm hoping some of you at least would feel more inspired and perhaps even more confident to start playing with investing and bringing the people you care about in a connected more way. I'm curious, who here can see something new and or thinks you have access to a tool that you could play with to help connect the people that you already care about together? Okay, total not waste of time in a windowless room. And I'm curious now that some of you have that, who here feels at least a little bit inspired or a little bit more confident that you can play with these ideas and work to connect the people you already care about? All right, fantastic. So Agile Denver, we did not totally waste this time. We've had a very short amount of time here. This afternoon, I'm leading a 3-hour workshop where then we have the time to go deeper into some of these ideas that I talk about. And of course, just like today, I'm hoping that if we do that, they'll become immediately relevant to what you're doing with the people you already care about. Okay, so for those of you who want to go deeper, the book is written. I know that a few books are going to be handed out as prizes here, but only a couple dozen. There's several hundred of us. The reason I wrote everything down was if you're working with people you want to bring together, you may want them to share the same language. Right? Why are invitations important? What is the boundary? Do we have rituals? Are they helping? Right? Why are the rituals now not helping? And so that's there available to you. We used to have an online course. I wasn't satisfied with it. Presumably, I'll do that again, so I'm letting you know that's available. And then if you do want me to come in and help a team or an organization get better at these ideas or see what's going on, I can do that. Lastly, there are evaluation forms on each seat. I travel country and I talk about this stuff. The only way that I know this is working and worth time and I'm helping smart people who are experienced get better is you tell me. And the only way I get better is the people I'm trying to reach tell me how to get better. You can put your email address down there. You know how that works. If you want to give it to me, fantastic. I will share I have 2 more books coming out in the next year. And the sophisticated marketing that I use is I give away the books to people who have said they already care about this work, in the theory that if the people who care about it get it and they think it's valuable, they're going to tell others. So if you do want to give us your email, the plan is to give everybody a preview, free digital copies of the books so that you'll know if they are relevant to your work. Okay. In the last 3 minutes, I want to share a final story for our time together. And for those of you who want to go deeper, we can meet at the workshop this afternoon. This is a photograph of Dai Sun Chang. He is my grandfather, born in 1917. And living in Honolulu, Hawaii, as a Chinese American, his father died of electrocution when he was working as an electrician, while Dai-sun was a young teenager. So he dropped out of school, and in order to help support his two brothers, his sister, and his mom, he started selling newspapers to the sailor boys in Pearl Harbor in Honolulu. I wasn't there. I imagine that on more than one occasion, he may have heard a racial epithet. Some years later, he met Betty Tom, fell in love, they got married. He was too poor to buy a house, and he left the newspaper job, gave it to his brother, and then went to school to become an electrician so that he could take the very job that killed his father. Couldn't afford a house, couldn't even afford a plot of land on a paved street, so what he bought was a plot of dirt outside of Honolulu next to an unpaved street, and because this is Honolulu, that meant mud. Couldn't afford to hire someone to build the house, so he and his two brothers gathered in the evenings and weekends and then built a two-bedroom home themselves so that he could raise a family in it. Years later, my grandmother would say that she knew every nail in the house because she handed the nail to him to pound in with his right arm until they had a house finished. In an era before online banking, my grandmother told me how they did their household finances. Each week they would put a series of mason jars on the kitchen table, and then they would put money in each mason jar in a specific order. One jar was for the car to keep it running. One jar was for the mortgage. The last jar was for groceries. And my grandmother said that she knew that whatever was left in that jar, she knew that she could stretch it to feed their family for one more week. The first jar was for the private school tuition for their 3 Chinese daughters, to make sure that they had a better education than every generation before them. And sure enough, 20 years later, Diane, Marcia, and Lori all graduated from college. The first generation in our family, on that side, to get a college education. They went to the state school, University of Hawaii, just up the street. I share this because I fly around the country and I talk to trained professionals to make them better at what they do. I work with executives connecting people in every time zone in the country, and in several cases where there are millions of people involved. I teach at some of the most famous universities in the world. And I know it's all because of the first jar. We take away the first jar, and I'm not on this stage with this microphone. Or said differently, it's because of that commitment every week to put that money in that jar, no matter what would be left in the last jar. And I share this because we've just spent an hour talking about connecting people we care about in perhaps the loneliest age in American history. And sometimes when I'm invited to talk about this, I talk to people who only want to create something that goes national and fills an arena, and there's a really long list that they can brag about. And maybe you'll get there. And this story reminds me that what really matters is we make a seemingly simple, seemingly innocuous commitment over and over and over again. And if we do that, we honest to goodness don't know what can change in one generation. That's what I want to leave you with in our time together. I know that some of you have tools that you can use Hopefully you feel inspired and you get another 2 days with professionals who have all voted with their feet to connect, to create new relationships that may support each other for an entire career, maybe in a life. That's what I got for our morning. I'm looking forward to meeting many of you later, and I can see this afternoon. Thank you for this time.